Okay, well, thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me to talk as well as to read. Talking's harder for poets, and I'm going to. This is a talk I gave at the Napa Valley Writers Conference this summer, and so part of it I'm going to read just to expedite things rather than try to paraphrase everything. And the title of the talk is The Part, the Whole, and the Role of Repetition. And I began to think about this issue because the poet and translator Richard Howard came to Washington University to spend 2 weeks among us. And he gave a reading of his work, and he looked at our students' work. And then he gave a craft lecture that turned out, in his case, to be a direct response to having looked at our students' work. And he had a bit of a complaint, and that complaint was that there was a lack of repetition, and he generalized that to include all of contemporary poetry. He felt like something was lacking, but it wasn't just a vague sense of a lack of rigor, but in fact these repetitions. So I begin there. When I met Richard Howard on the evening of his arrival to have dinner, I asked whether he'd received the poems by our students, and he said indeed he had. He'd received them and he had read them on the plane en route to St. Louis. He said he had to say he wasn't sure what to make of the work. Was this a test? The poems were brilliant, he said, which of course warmed my heart. But he had to decide that all of our students were mad. And was this all my doing? And I said, not at all. And to which he replied, then do you mean to say it's all Carl's doing? Referring to my colleague at Washington University, Carl Phillips. Richard's craft talk, which he gave at the end of his residency, was an expression of his frustration at work that has elements of brilliancy, but somehow, perhaps both on the surface and beneath it, has the general incoherency that one associates with, yes, some forms of madness, but also with some forms of avant-garde art. He generalized his complaint to include all of contemporary poetry written by young poets and labeled it a lack of repetitions. Now, in the question and answer period, people kept trying to pin him down and say, what do you mean by repetitions? Do you mean rhyme? He said, no, rhyme was indeed a repetition, but he didn't mean rhyme. And then, was it a lack of meter that he was complaining about? And he countered with the fact that syllabics was also a form of repetition. He was frustratingly vague about what seemed to be missing, and in the moment, I too sat there wanting nothing so much as to be told exactly what he had in mind when he used that word repetitions. But since then, I've really appreciated how clever it was of him not to give us the answer, like some sphinx, but instead to force us, and me in particular, to think about this whole notion of repetition in the past, in poetry of the past, and in contemporary. And I've started thinking about whether or not repetition was necessary for cohesion, and if so, what coherency really meant. And so I began to look at that word coherency to see what its opposite was, which of course is incoherent, that which doesn't cohere, which has a lack of adhesiveness, which is composed of discrete elements, which is loose and not tied together. And in some ways, I found that I was in agreement with Richard, that I think that there is a lack of coherency in a lot of contemporary poetry. And certainly on the surface, a lot of it looks simply disjunctive, and a lot of it's very elliptical. And that in itself isn't bad. But when there's nothing that ties those various elements together, then we do get this sense that there's a lack of rigor, that instead of a whole, we're still being given just parts, and sometimes those parts, we can make something of them, and sometimes we can't. What once gave poetry rigor was a contrivance of formal elements. And when I use the word contrivance, I don't necessarily mean that pejoratively. I think that we think of contrivance as something bad. But to contrive means to invent, to plan, or to plot. We've come to think of contrivance as mere trickery, when in fact it's the basis of art. To contrive means to affect, to manage, to bring about by invention. Its synonyms in Webster are to devise, invent, frame, and concoct, which of course is nothing short of what art is. None of this is to argue for simplicity or against difficulty. It's an argument for creativity, for skill, for some evidence of a plan, for a hint of underpinnings that hold the discrete elements together. And we might talk about why poets have turned against those very things that traditionally held poems together, which is form and artifice. To be closer to the naive is one reason, closer to the earnest, the sincere, the so-called real, to be less pretentious, less reliant on learned strategies, more democratic, to avoid the quote-unquote high poetical. However, the most democratic of poets, Walt Whitman, relied heavily on repetitions. He gave up meter and normative rhyme, but he substituted anaphora. And as most of you know, anaphora is the repetition of the same word or words at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, sentences, or lines. It ends up enhancing the sense of a line, the sense that there is a line. And what is poetry made of but lines? Oh, sorry, these are handouts here. Oops. And there's a second handout that you can follow that one with a handout, a chaser handout. So we'll start with that first handout, which is the first 2 pages are Section 6 and Section 7 from Song of Myself. And I'm going to read it first and ask you to listen with your ear, and you can see at the same time all of the repetitions that hold this together. A child said, "What is the grass?" Fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven. Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark and say, whose? Or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic, and it means sprouting alike in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white, Kanak, Tuckahoe, Congressman, Cuff. I give them the same, I receive them the same. And now it seems to me the beautiful uncut hair of graves. Tenderly will I use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men. It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. And here you are, the mother's laps. This grass is very dark to be from the white heads of old mothers, darker than the colorless beards of old men, dark to come from under the faint red roofs of mouths. Oh, I perceive, after all, so many uttering tongues, and I perceive that they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? And what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Has anyone supposed it lucky to be born? I hasten to inform him or her it is just as lucky to die, and I know it. I pass death with the dying and birth with the new-washed babe, and am not contained between my hat and boots, and peruse manifold objects, no two alike, and everyone good, the earth good, and the stars good, and their adjuncts all good. I am not an earth, nor an adjunct of an earth. I am the mate and companion of people, all just as immortal and fathomless as myself. They do not know how immortal, but I know. Every kind for itself and its own. For me, mine, male and female. For me, those that have been boys and that love women. For me, the man that is proud and feels how it stings to be slighted. For me, the sweetheart and the old maid. For me, mothers and the mothers of mothers. For me, lips that have smiled, eyes that have shed tears. For me, children and the begetters of children. Undrape, you are not guilty to me, nor stale, nor discarded. I see through the broadcloth and gingham, whether or no, and am around, tenacious, acquisitive, tireless, and cannot be shaken away. At its simplest, this section begins with the idea of grass and ends with the idea of selfhood. It begins with tentativeness and ends with certainty, and it proceeds by way of emphatic repetitions. The initial guessing and conjuring, it may be this, it may be that, paradoxically gives the speaker greater authority than if he were to speak from a position of absolute certainty. We're willing to believe someone who, like us, doesn't know for certain what nature means. And in this case, there's not only the tentativeness of a guess, but the guessing itself is undercut by its multiplicity. He guesses and then he guesses again. It could be this or it could be that. What the grass finally becomes is, quote, the beautiful uncut hair of graves. At this point, it's anthropomorphized. The grass as hair becomes part of the human anatomy, and the hair links the grass to the tender breasts of young men the speaker might have loved had he but known them. Or, he goes on, perhaps this is the hair of old people or children taken too soon out of their mother's laps. And then the grass metamorphoses further into the laps themselves, the surface on which we lie in security and comfort. The anaphora of it may be cedes to the epiphora of mother's laps, epiphora being the phrase repeated at the end of the line instead of the beginning of the line. The mother becomes earth itself, the earth mother. The grass becomes all meaning and vast in its possible manifestations. It becomes godlike in its ability to transform itself into whatever we encounter. In the next first paragraph, we have the repetition of the word dark. The repetition conveys emphasis, but also furthers our sense of a search. It's a comparative way of definition. It's dark to be from the white heads of old mothers, meaning darker than the white hair of old women. It's also darker than the colorless beards of old men. Then we come to this quizzical comparative, dark to come from under the faint red roofs of mouths. The quest to pin down the quality of this thing called grass has taken us into the human mouth. But how can that be? What is grass doing growing in the mouth? Because we're in the comparative mode, we have only to look around for something under the red roofs of mouths to compare grass to, and we find the papilla, those grass-like projections on the human tongue. And the next line confirms our surmise, oh, I perceive, after all, so many uttering tongues. And with the second anaphoric, I perceive, we get the statement that they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. What is this they? These grasses, these hairs. Said differently, it's not for nothing that there are these similarities between the papilla of the tongue and these grasses. It is because we humans are part of the natural world. Whitman collapses the difference between the vegetative world and the biological world. We are part of nature. The grass is us. It is our laps. It is our hair. It's mirrored in the tiny aspects of our tongues. I wish, he goes on to say, I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women and the hints about old men and mothers and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. And why can't he translate these hints? Because in the translation, something would be lost. Because all we have to make sense of the world are hints. The young men of the first line become the old men of the second. The young women of the first become the mothers of the second, and their offspring, a repetition of the epiphoric endings we had earlier, taken soon out of their laps, become the young men and women of the first line, the eternal cycle of life and death. They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And of course, that double use of sprout as both a beginning grass blade and a sprout, meaning a little tot or child. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. Death cycles into life and ceases the moment life appears. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed. And luckier, with all these ands, and this, and this, and this, we have the sense of an argument being built. What is a self, the myself of which Whitman sings? It is not, quote, contained between my hat and boots. So a self is more than the physical body. That's, of course, what's contained between boots and a hat. It's the multiplicity of everything earthly, plus that fathomless dimension, which can't be pinned down to a single coherent set of elements or circumstances, and it is good. No two alike, and everyone good, the earth good, and the stars good, and their adjuncts all good. The vastness of the argument, like the vast reach of the poem, threatens to fall into chaos, but for these insistent repetitions that hold it all together, and these metamorphoses, the metamorphoses that lead the argument along. And without that, and imagine, of course, encountering this poem in Whitman's time, before contemporary poetry, before modernist poetry somehow prepared us to begin to do the work of tying things together, where rhyme, meter, stanza tied it for us before. Now we're asked to participate in that in a whole new way, a whole new thoughtful way. So these repetitions are really critical, without which we have chaos. How could anyone, particularly then, lead from the beginning to where we get to at the end? So this vast metaphysical argument gets held together by repetitions. And it begins with Whitman, begins in a new way, re-begins with Whitman in terms of repetition. And then let's go to the next inclusion, which is that poem that tries the minds of undergraduates everywhere, and even some graduate students, The Wasteland. And I've chosen part 5, which is almost incantatorily repetitious. And again, I'll read this. And it's just this first page. After the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and place and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains, he who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying, with a little patience. There is no water, but only rock, rock and no water, and the sandy road, the road winding above among the mountains, which are mountains of rock without water. If there were water, we should stop and drink. Amongst the rock one cannot stop or think. Sweat is dry and feet are in the sand. If there were only water amongst the rock, dead mountain mouth of carious teeth that cannot spit. Here one can neither stand, nor lie, nor sit. There is not even silence in the mountains, but dry, sterile thunder without rain. There is not even solitude in the mountains, but red, sullen faces sneer and snarl from doors of mud-cracked houses. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, a spring, a pool among the rock, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and dry grass singing, but sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 but there is no water. Now, if you go to the next page, what I've done on that page is to bold every word that's repeated in this section, And further, I've underlined any examples of anaphora. So after the, if there were water, if there were only water, there is not even, if there were water. So, and then things that are smaller examples of repetition was just the, here, but, and. So we have, and then the next page ties together some of those with other parallel constructions. If there were water, we should stop and drink. If there were only water amongst the rock, and within that, amongst the rock, one cannot stop or think. If there were only water amongst the rock, where the anaphora of amongst the rock at the beginning of the line becomes the epiphora of amongst the rock at the end of the line. So what you can see is this intense tangle of both repetitions, of alliteration, of rhyme. We have a lot of internal rhyme. We have a lot of assonance. We have the off-rhyme of faces and patience in the first stanza. We have places, faces, reverberation, the long A, place. We have dead and dying. We have the dying, crying. And you can see how few words aren't repeated, and those begin to take on a new kind of resonance as well. We have torchlight, crying, shouting, prison, patience, dying. You begin to see a kind of subtext in the fact that the lack of repetition. So around that you have this kind of emphasis that is almost unrelenting. And within that you have this story that's being told of aridity, of a kind of lack. And what's interesting is there's this paradoxical inclusion in the onomatopoeic line of drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 where that very thing that is missing is actually created and given to us, but it becomes an oasis in this desert because the moment it's given to us, we get the water, and that's followed by, but there is no water. And so it's actually subtracted from the equation, immediately negated, but there is none. This is what you've been looking for, but no, you don't get it. So we have, again, a kind of radical departure from normative rhyme. We have a radical departure from meter. We have a radical departure from linearity. And instead, we get this kind of cohesion that's results from repetitions. We get emphasis that results from repetitions, and we get metamorphosis, which seems to me a quality that is much more inherent in contemporary poetry, even though linearity is metamorphosis too. You begin with a subjective state in the lyric that takes you to someplace, usually epiphany. You don't get that kind of linearity in contemporary lyric or in contemporary poetry. It's not chronological, and you're not going to get the epiphany at the end. You're going to get an invitation to construct meaning along the way, and the epiphany is going to be spread out. If there's an epiphany, it's going to be spread out, and it's going to be something that you've constructed and maybe construct differently with different readings of the poem. So let's go to contemporary poetry and see what's happened since Whitman and since Eliot. And the first example is that the Chaser handout, which is Blue Codices section of Brenda Hillman's Loose Sugar. And what we get is a section in the book. It's introduced, as you can see on page 58, on the left hand of this handout, Blue Codices, and in parentheses, a cycle of poems on depression and alchemy. And then further down, explain the unknown by the more unknown, an alchemical theorem. So again, this is, epigraph is a very traditional lyric tool where you have the quote of someone else that the poem is somehow going to use as a veil through which it needs to be read. This one more or less anonymous, because we are given it as a theorem and not connected with a voice. And we get this guidance with the parentheses, a cycle of poems on depression and alchemy. Now, usually we don't get that kind of guidance, but we can get that guidance through traditional form. So we have something that's called an elegy or an ode, and we know that encoded within the ode is praise, and encoded within the elegy is death, and all that that encompasses. But here the poet has added, because we may not know, based on blue codices, what even a codice is, a cycle of poems on depression and alchemy. And then we get a series of 13 poems, each with 12 lines. So again, we have a repetitive element in the number of lines. And for the most part, they're blatantly lyric poems, as we can see if we look at them a bit. But what's obvious on the page is also, in this smaller point font, these additions at the bottom. And you can see, if you look through the pages, there are always 3. So there's a set of 3. Sometimes they're stacked, as you can see on the third of the inclusions on page 59. So let's read this poem and then look to see what is being left out of the poem, or what we're invited to put back into the poem. The cliffs. For a while the great secret wasn't apparent to you. What you thought you should become, you wouldn't. You faced the blue, the favored direction, and hoped for something beyond the permanent. So, this sorrow you're experiencing again, you don't have to work on it. If they show you a candle uncovered in the sea cave, can't you just approach it like an ocean from which nothing was selected, but everything had been kept? So there's nothing that sets this poem apart from many lyric poems that we might have encountered. There's that single point of view, the subjective point of view. We're dealing with states of subjectivity, and the poet is inviting us to see that subjective world through his or her eyes. But we don't usually encounter the small type at the end. Let's just, by mixing rain on the Golden Gate with sulfur force, and then obviously something's cut off, in quotes, how to start without starting, which may in fact relate back to what we've just had, a start that doesn't really start. First stage, Mercury, 2 snakes, wrapped in the nameless again. And then we get this kind of sly fluidity of the nameless again, where the again might be a noun, that thing which we somehow objectify as being a state, an again, or in the nameless again. So again, the emphasis travels back and forth across those 2 words in a way that also suggests recurrence, anything that happens again and again, and why can't I say that word? Rumination. The rumination that's typical of depression, going over something again and again and again in that way that is both troubling and annihilating after a while. All of these things, there's an invitation to work them back in a way that becomes very fluid. Do we talk about, let's just by mixing rain on the Golden Gate with sulfur force? Are we talking about alchemy? Mixing 2 things to get a third thing? Are we mixing the lyric and the non-lyric? This compilation of the colloquial, the appropriated speech, some hints of alchemy, something that's both ancient and something that has larger significance than in and of itself. It's not just mixing chemicals together to get gold. It was really about the whole idea of perfection and how close to perfection and how close to perfect knowledge, with the idea that gold was the perfect ore. If we could make the perfect ore out of imperfect substances, it meant that we too as humans could somehow as imperfect as we are, reach perfection. So there are all these kinds of resonances that are contained within this. There's also, seems to me, a desire to subvert the limitations of the lyric. So there's a statement being made here about the fact that the lyric isn't enough. If the lyric were enough, why add something to it? But there's this need, this compulsion to somehow add what gets left out, what's going on in the mind, what's fueling the lyric, what's going on around the poet who's sitting at the table writing the lyric. There's an invitation to create a world that the lyric is a part of without forgetting, which is what the traditional lyric asks us to do. Forget about the rest of the world. Forget about your own interior voices. Forget about the car alarm that's going on, your cell phone that's ringing, the fact that you've got, something that you just remembered you have to do as soon as you get up from the table. All of that's incorporated. I'm not going to spend time going through all of these, but think of it, if you want to look at this later, from the point of repetitions, and you'll see that across poems and across these small additions, as well as between additions and between poems, there are repetitions as well. So the third poem, Horizontal Series, has in the third stanza a line, "You didn't have to be just like those," which reads backwards to the small print at the bottom of the previous poem, Doubting Chamber, in that third stack, Agency, Viceroy, and probably you just were about to. So just like those, you just were about. Again, this invitation to do more work, to do the kind of work that modernism introduced us to in terms of meaning construction, but it goes a step further. It makes contemporary and no longer modernist. So, or you could argue whether it makes it postmodern. In Deep Noticing, on the next page, there's a poem, "There was a deep noticing around the tent. They say for a transformation to be made, you'd have to give up the gravity of a broken self, but that's ridiculous. If the mystery doesn't want to be known, it sees you from the secret ground, as those seeds with spiked tongues or wings traveling through the woods will be opened only in great fires." And below we have "cough syrup stain around the mouth of the moon." And again, the moon being an iconoclastic lyric symbol. So there was a deep noticing around the tent, the cough syrup stain around the mouth. And we're asked to deeply notice all of these kinds of things, but also all of these correspondences, which are not obvious, which lack intricate direction, but because it steps outside of the usual, we're forced to either do that work. Now, someone like Richard Howard, who's complaining about lack of repetitions, may not see repetitions here. And I think that the contemporary poetry relies on new reading strategies, and that's the problem with it, because we bring to those poems old reading strategies for poetry, and we're not going to find those repetitions, but they are there in the best sense. Let's go to the next example, which is My Life by Lynn Heginian. And this is a book of prose poems, if you will. It was first written in 1978 when Heginian was 37 years old, and each section at that point was comprised of 37 sections. The book was comprised of 37 sections, each section containing 37 sentences, one for each year of her life. And the content of each section roughly corresponds to a content of a life. So year one. Section 14 is more or less about the 14th year of the life. She rewrote this later when she was 45, adding 8 sections and then adding 8 sentences to each of the previous 37 sections, but weaving those among them, so you couldn't tell what had been added later. Each section is introduced, as you can see here, by this small window, and in the window there's a phrase. Those phrases are repeated throughout the book from time to time and often revised, just the way our knowledge is revised as we get older, and just the way that language revises itself as time goes on. So as for we who love to be astonished, later becomes, as for we who love to be astonished, every Sears smells the same. And it returns again as for we who love to be astonished, you would say, these are its ghosts. So again, this idea of ghosting throughout, where language becomes an element that comes back as a ghost to either haunt you or to delight you in some way. So I think it's in this first section. At the end of this first section, the next to last sentence, you cannot linger on the lamb. Now, on the lamb, and this is section 2 in the book, so it corresponds to the second year of life, beginning with you spill the sugar when you lift the spoon, as a 2-year-old might spill the sugar as she or he lifted the spoon. But this on the lamb is also a typical mishearing that a child might hear. If you hear the phrase, somebody's on the lamb, of course you think L-A-M-B. So she's incorporating these mishearings as a stage of language and a stage of language acquisition. The sentences of the sections, if you continue to read here, you'll see they follow no logic of chronology, no linearity of traditional storytelling. She subverts this whole genre of autobiography when we get something called My Life by Bill Clinton, My Life by Katharine Hepburn. Those are stories that have been selectively told, arranging a chronology which makes up a fiction, a serious fiction about how one's life progressed over time. She has non sequiturs. You spill the sugar when you lift the spoon. My father had filled an old apothecary jar with what he called sea glass, bits of old bottles rounded and textured by the sea, so abundant on beaches. There is no solitude. It buries itself in veracity. It is as if one splashed in the water, lost by one's tears. My mother had climbed into the garbage can in order to stamp down the accumulated trash, but the can was knocked off balance, and when she fell, she broke her arm. She could only give a little shrug. And again, the fluidity of language is continually captured here. So she could only give a little shrug because she now has this broken arm, but she can also give a little shrug about such an event. And usually autobiography are those transformative events that are lined up as if they happened in a way that we appreciated at the time how important they were. But in fact, our autobiography is made up of the trivial, of the moments. Our memories are made up of the trivial but emotionally laden moments that are particular to our lives and idiosyncratically mean something to us and not to anyone else. And it's a fiction if we try to say, these are the memorable moments, and you know they're memorable because they have neon lights around them. So this is a very smart kind of autobiography which doesn't explain how one came to be who one is so much as how one acquires understanding of language, how one acquires a sense of time. And she's done it by incorporating all of those tiny little things and all of those nuances about the way language works. So I'm not going to spend more time on that simply because I want to talk about a number of other things, and one of them is this last, or should be one of the last handouts of your big handout, which is a page from a book by Jenny Booley, a young poet, called The Body. And this is a typical page, and the repetitive element, and the repetitive element clearly in Heginian is one, the appearance of the page, that window, those phrases, those sentences, and the idea of these years. In Booley, we've gone further than that, and one of the repetitions is the blank page. The poem now has been eradicated, and instead what we're left with are only the footnotes. And the footnotes, you'll see, don't have a linearity either. One, because the weather and landscape was forever shifting, and birds gave birth to new birds that birthed new birds ad infinitum. This passage is historically inaccurate. The main argument, however, remains unaffected. Two, I would find what I wanted to do, and I would stick with it. In my childhood home, the silverware laid in drawers, heaped together like his matched loves. Three, this was corrected in the second edition by the author. In the original, she wrote, prayer is merely a hopeful form of apostrophe. Four, an alias. Now, again, there's a lot here. We have the inclusion of a first-person speaker that comes in. We don't usually find that in footnotes. We get some kind of comment that may be reflected back to the missing page, where the second edition by the author, this was corrected. In the original, she wrote, prayer is merely a hopeful form of apostrophe. And then this whole idea of an alias or a, that might be mine, so it's okay. The form of standing behind something and standing so far behind it that you can no longer see the author. And in fact, some of the footnotes will later refer back to the poet Jenny Booley, as well as another poet, the famous poet. And so we get this kind of play. We also get a lot of inclusions in the footnotes of literature. So we get a Tristan and Isolde. We get a history of reading. We get the body of literature itself. So the body being missing, the body of the work is missing, but we get these other bodies that come into the picture. So again, we get repetition. Certainly we get repetition over these footnotes about different figures, and it becomes the story, one of a love of reading, and there's a love story that gets told. And there's this subversion of the lyric form. So we no longer need the lyric because we already know what the lyric tells us. We know the lyric tells us, love is important, death is ever present. That lyric statement is so reliable that we don't even need it here on the page anymore. We can comment back on it without even having it present. So, and then I just want to mention a last form of repetition that's very prevalent in contemporary poetry, and that is literary allusion. And those are your final handouts, are Marvell's To His Coy Mistress. And I think I've included a bit of the wasteland where Marvell comes in, in the fire sermon where the beloved is Sweeney going to Mrs. Porter, who's a prostitute. And so we have the lyric again ironicized and urbanized into the sound of horns and motors. At my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet in soda water. So I'm just going to read two poems, and then I'll stop. And the one is the Marvell, and so that we can see what somebody has done with it. To His Coy Mistress. Had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of Umber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze, 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part, and for the last age should show your heart. And the last age should show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate, but at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie, deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song, then worms shall try that long-preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour, than languish in his slow-chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we will make him run. So again, going back to the Eliot, it becomes, what do I do with the Eliot? It all hinges on, but at my back from time to time I hear, which is, of course, that moment where the speaker to his coy mistress invites the woman to give up all of her reservations because time is short, and let's just have pleasure. So, so the pleasure now gets, as I said before, ironized and urbanized as to Sweeney going to the prostitute while the horns are honking behind him. And now we have Doug Powell, who is writing for a young man on the Red Line train to his boy mistress. Writing for a young man on the Red Line train to his boy mistress, first to praise his frame, pliable as hickory, his greasy locks, waxy ears, I'll stop the world and melt with you, bristling through a nearby headset. If I had time to ride this monster to the end, I would, hung by hand straps, jostle through the downtown stations, each stop bringing us closer to what? Gather? Perhaps. Or that exit of the tunnel where I look back and poof, no lover. Men have led shameful lives for less proportioned fare, tossing greetings thick as Rapunzel's hair. Anybody ever told you that you, here it comes, lad, stifle those chortles, resemble a young James Dean? Why, fiddle-dee-dee, he bats his lids, the fantasy already turning to ruin. What if he debarked at my destination of pure coincidence, followed through the coppice of the square, fox and hound, I'd lead him on a merry chase, pausing every few, admire a fedora, check the windows of the haberdashers, and cruise the sartorial shops, until I felt his winded breathing on my neck, yawned, and departed again. We could while away the afternoon just so, but at my back, etc. Fresh and sprouting in chestnut-colored pubes is how I'd want him, not after the dregs of cigarettes, the years of too many Scotch sours. Why, I wouldn't even know what to say to one who drinks Scotch sours, except sir, and tough luck about those Red Sox, which it always is. Now I've spent myself in lines and lost. Where is that boy of yesteryear? Let him die young and leave a pretty corpse, die with his legs in the air. So we have here an obvious subversion of the usual narrative of a he and she, and we have a tracking of the ambivalence. Not in Marvell's poem, we have a tracking of the supposed ambivalence on the part of the she. I know you think this, I know you think that, I know, and yes, I could do this. I could spend years at the side of the Ganges admiring your eyes, but time is short. In Powell's poem, there's a romantic lack of ambivalence on the part of the beloved, and it's all located now in the speaker. He has all the ambivalence. he even thinks, well, what good would it do to, even if we were so lucky as to get off on the same stop, and I chase you through these Cambridge locales, because this is all set in the Red Line train, is a key to the fact that this is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Copley Square, so the coppice of the square, and the haberdashery shops, and all of this, and the Red Sox locates this for you, and gives this kind of verisimilitude now to the poem. But and there's no idealizing this beloved. So he's got waxy ears and greasy locks, even though his frame is pliable as hickory. All of the ambivalence, as I say, is within the speaker. He's the one who's unable to throw caution to the wind, which is what Marvell wants the woman to do. He doesn't even speak to this object of attention and of lust, but instead, at my back, etc. And he doesn't even include as much of the Marvell as Eliot's including, because he doesn't have to. We know Marvell, poetry readers are trusted to know Marvell enough that we know that Time's chariot is what's at his back. Which says something about the perimeters of the poetry reading public as much as anything. But it also says that this has been around a long time. This poem has been around a long time. And so those repetitions, we can abbreviate them more and more and rely on the rest of it to be imported from our memory, from our collective memory about what poetry is and what the lyric is. And this lyric is stacked atop all those lyrics of the past in a way that's even more obvious now than it was for Eliot's readers. So, and of course this idea of the death at the end, where we're left not with pleasure but with a surefire death, and the death is unromantic, die with his legs in the air like a bug, as it were, or some kind of pathetic creature. And that boy of yesteryear becomes Marvell, becomes the more romantic, the speaker when he was younger and more romantic and less disillusioned. And of course all those boys of yesteryear that die of AIDS, because that's also the backstory of the poem, is that's what's at the back too, is Time's chariot for this speaker also has that, the chariot of the plague that hovers over all of sexual encounters and reflects back to all of those losses. So I mentioned that because it is a strong suit of contemporary poetry. All of these allusions, coded or uncoded, are a way of repeating. And again, on the surface it looks like we've given up forms of repetition, but in fact there are new forms of repetition. Very often they go across a number of poems, though, not within a poem, but across a series like Blue Codices, across a book like My Life or Jenny Booley's The Body, and you have to look with a wider lens to see the repetitions. But we really need them, we rely on them, and I think when any of that is missing, that is what's perceived as a lack of rigor in contemporary poetry and a frustration. How does one follow? And these begin to be landmarks and milestones when they go across a book, so that we get an idea of an invitation to link these things up in a way that gives coherency and gives, the definition of artifice for this particular thing, which is very helpful. It's a helpful way to read and to be instructed. So that's it.